There comes a moment in life when the noise disappears, not because the world becomes peaceful, but because everyone who once spoke your name has gone silent. It is the moment when your phone stops ringing, when advice stops coming, when even the people who promised to stay walk away without explanation. And in that silence, a terrifying question rises from the depths of the heart. What do I do now when I have no one? But what if that moment is not the end? What if it is the beginning of something far greater? This is not a story about success. It is not a story about revenge. It is not a story about proving anyone wrong. This is a story about a man who lost everything and discovered that when a man has no one but God, he finally becomes unbreakable. If you have ever felt alone, forgotten, or stripped of everything you trusted, listen carefully. This story may not change your circumstances tonight, but it may change you forever.
Aarav lived in a small village where life moved slowly, as if time itself had learned patience from the people who lived there. He did not wake up to alarms or rushing thoughts. He woke up to the sound of birds, to the soft light of morning slipping through cracked windows, to the quiet breath of a world that had not yet learned to hurry. His home was simple. Mud walls, a tin roof, a wooden door that creaked with familiarity. But within those walls lived something many people search for their entire lives and never find: contentment. Aarav was not rich by the world's definition, but he was rich in routine, rich in gratitude, rich in faith. Every morning, before the village stirred, he would sit quietly, hands folded, eyes closed, not asking God for more, only thanking Him for what already was. He worked hard, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but because honest work gave his days meaning. He laughed easily, spoke gently, and trusted deeply. In the evenings, when the sun melted into the horizon, Aarav would return home to the simple joy of togetherness, shared meals, familiar voices, the comfort of belonging. Life was not perfect, but it was peaceful. And peace, when you have it, feels ordinary. You don't guard it, you don't fear losing it, you assume it will always be there. Aarav did not know that life was quietly preparing him to a lesson that could only be taught through loss. He did not know that everything he loved, everything he leaned on, everything that made life feel safe would soon be taken away, not to destroy him, but to reveal what could never be taken from him. And so, beneath the calm surface of his simple life, fate waited patiently. Because sometimes, before God builds a man's strength, He first removes every place that man is hiding it. And Aarav's journey had only just begun.
Life rarely collapses all at once. It begins with whispers. For Aarav, the change did not arrive as a storm. It arrived as a pause, a hesitation in joy, a heaviness that could not be named. The mornings felt the same, yet different. The birds still sang, but his heart listened less. The prayers still rose from his lips, but his mind lingered longer in silence. Small problems appeared, quiet, uninvited. A season of poor harvest, unexpected expenses, longer days of labor with less to show at the end. Nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded tears. And that is how worry enters a man's life, not screaming, but sitting beside him like an old acquaintance. Aarav did not complain. He did not panic. He told himself what strong men always do: this will pass. But at night, when the world went still, he felt something unfamiliar, a weight pressing softly against his chest. He prayed as he always had, but this time, after the prayer ended, he remained seated longer than usual, waiting, listening, as if expecting an answer that did not come. Still, he trusted, because faith is easy when life is kind. Faith feels natural when the ground beneath your feet is firm. Aarav did not yet know that faith would soon be tested, not by what was taken, but by what was slowly withheld. And so he continued forward, unaware that this gentle discomfort was the first lesson life was placing in his hands.
People do not leave all at once. They fade. At first, Aarav barely noticed. Conversations became shorter, visits less frequent, promises more delayed than broken. When he spoke, people listened with half their attention. When he asked, they answered with uncertainty instead of assurance. It was subtle, almost polite. And that is what made it painful, because there was no argument to point to, no betrayal loud enough to confront. Just a growing emptiness where support once lived. The same people who once sat beside him now stood a little farther away, not out of cruelty, but out of comfort. When life is easy, people walk together. When life becomes heavy, everyone checks their own strength first. Aarav learned this without being told. He noticed the empty chairs, the unanswered messages, the way help was promised tomorrow and forgotten the next day. Yet he remained calm. He did not beg. He did not blame. Because deep inside, a quiet truth was forming, one that would later reshape his soul. He began to understand that human support is often seasonal. It stays when the weather is pleasant and disappears when the sky grows dark. Still, Aarav carried himself with dignity. He worked harder, spoke less, and leaned more into silence. Unknowingly, he was being prepared. Because before life removes everything, it first removes the illusion that people are permanent pillars. And as the world slowly stepped back, Aarav stood still, unaware that soon he would have no one left to lean on but God alone. Some losses arrive without warning. No preparation, no explanation. Only silence where life once spoke. For Aarav, that silence came like a long night that refused to end. What he loved was taken from him, not violently, not loudly, but completely. The home that once echoed with familiar sounds now held only empty air. The spaces where voices once lived felt wider than they should have been. Grief did not rush in, it stood still. There were no tears at first, no cries, only a numbness so deep it felt like time itself had stopped moving. Aarav sat alone in the dim light, hands resting where warmth once existed, staring at a future he could not recognize. Questions came, but none demanded answers, because when loss is total, words become useless. That night, he did not ask God why. He did not accuse. He did not bargain. He simply sat there, breathing, as if afraid that even grief might leave him next. And in that unbearable stillness, Aarav learned a painful truth. Sometimes God removes everything familiar so a man can finally meet himself. Not as a husband, not as a provider, not as someone needed by others, but as a soul standing alone before God.
After loss comes waiting. Not the hopeful kind, the quiet, aching kind. Aarav continued to pray. He never stopped, but something had changed. He no longer prayed with expectation. He prayed with endurance. Each prayer ended the same way, not with relief, but with silence. Days passed, then weeks. The world moved forward while Aarav remained suspended between memory and uncertainty. At times, doubt crept in, not loud, not angry, but gentle and exhausting. Is God listening? Have I been forgotten? Yet even these questions were whispered as if he feared breaking what little faith he had left. He learned that faith is not always confidence. Sometimes faith is simply refusing to walk away, even when the answers do not come, even when the pain stays. Aarav stopped asking for things to be fixed, stopped asking for things to return. Instead, he asked for strength to carry what could not be changed. And though the heavens remained quiet, something within him began to shift. Because when prayers seem unanswered, they are often not being ignored. They are shaping the man who is praying. And slowly, without him realizing it, Aarav's faith was no longer dependent on outcomes. It was becoming unshakable, not because life was improving, but because he was learning how to stand even when nothing around him did.
There is a difference between being alone and being abandoned. Aarav discovered this truth only after everyone else was gone. At first, the loneliness was heavy. It followed him like a shadow. It sat beside him during meals and lay awake with him through long nights. But one morning, something changed. There was no miracle, no sudden answer, no dramatic sign from the sky. Only a feeling, quiet, steady, undeniable. For the first time since his loss, Aarav did not feel empty. He felt accompanied. As he sat in silence, he realized that the stillness he feared was not absence, it was presence. God had not spoken in thunder, he had spoken in peace. Aarav understood then that when every human voice fades, the divine voice becomes clear. Not loud, not demanding, but grounding. He stopped trying to escape his solitude, stopped filling it with noise. Instead, he allowed it to teach him. And in that sacred quiet, Aarav found strength not from having someone beside him, but from knowing he was never truly alone. Aarav did not announce his return to life. He did not explain his pain. He did not tell his story. He simply began again. One day at a time, one task at a time. He woke up early, worked with focus, prayed without urgency. There was no audience, no applause, no one watching. And that was the point. He rebuilt his life quietly, not to prove strength, but to practice it. He learned to carry responsibility without recognition, to endure fatigue without complaint. Each day of effort became a form of worship, each moment of patience a silent prayer. Aarav understood something many never do. Real growth does not announce itself. It happens in silence, far from approval. And as the days turned into months, he stood taller, not in pride, but in stability. Because when a man learns to walk alone with God, he no longer needs the world's permission to move forward. He had lost everything once, but now he was building something that could never be taken away. Silence had once frightened Aarav. Now it became his teacher. In the absence of noise, he began to hear himself clearly. Not the voice shaped by expectations, but the one formed by truth. Pain no longer demanded answers, it offered understanding. Aarav noticed that what once broke him no longer controlled him. The memories still existed, but they no longer ruled his days. Silence taught him restraint. It taught him patience. It taught him how to respond without reacting. He learned that strength is not loud, it does not argue, it does not seek validation. True strength stands firm without needing to be seen. In moments of stillness, Aarav felt his heart expand, not with pride, but with clarity. He no longer feared being alone, because loneliness had transformed into self-awareness. And in that awareness, he understood that God had not removed his life, he had refined it. What remained was not weakness, what remained was wisdom.
Success does not always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly, noticed only by those who once turned away. People began to see Aarav again, not because he called them, not because he needed them, but because strength has a presence that cannot be hidden. The same faces returned, offering words they once withheld, support they once delayed. Aarav listened politely, smiled gently, but something had changed. He no longer leaned on approval. He no longer depended on recognition. There was no bitterness in his heart, no desire to remind anyone of where they had been absent, because he had already learned his most important lesson alone. He understood that people may return, but reliance must remain with God. Aarav walked forward, not away from others, but no longer defined by them. Because when a man survives the season where no one stands beside him, he emerges free. Free from dependence, free from fear, and grounded in a strength that only solitude and faith can create.
There comes a moment in a man's life when everything becomes clear. Not because life finally makes sense, but because the heart finally stops resisting it. Aarav stood where he once feared he would break, with no guarantees, no protection, no one to lean on. And yet, he was calm. He understood now that losing everything had not made him weak. It had made him true. When everything was stripped away, people, comfort, certainty, what remained was unshakable. Faith not based on outcomes, strength not borrowed from others, peace not dependent on circumstances. Aarav realized that God had not taken his life from him. God had taken distractions. Because as long as a man has something else to depend on, he never fully discovers God. But when a man has no one but God, he discovers patience without fear, strength without noise, and peace without explanation. He no longer measured life by gain or loss. He measured it by alignment, with purpose, with truth, with God. And in that alignment, he finally had everything.
If you are listening to this with a heavy heart, this story was not shared by accident. Maybe you feel forgotten. Maybe the people you trusted are no longer beside you. Maybe life has reduced your world to silence and waiting. Do not rush to escape it, because silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is where God speaks the clearest. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. What feels like loss today may be the foundation of your strength tomorrow. Stay patient, stay faithful, stay still. When the world walks away and all that remains is you and God, know this: you are not at the end. You are at the beginning of becoming unbreakable. May peace guide your heart. May patience strengthen your spirit. And may you discover, as Aarav did, that having God alone is having more than enough.